Good morning, everyone. Yeah? Oh, good. Okay. This is Simona, by the way. She told me that she's going to support the session by helping with technical things or other aspects of maybe unruly audiences, etc. My name is Frank Oefen. Until yesterday, my name was not on this panel nor on the program. But I'm happy to be here. I'm replacing Marcus Roberts from Savills, who unfortunately cannot be here. But when it comes to student housing, it's not such a large community yet. So all of us know each other from the last couple of years working together at the international scale. And I know that he and I are both very excited that this topic is also at this conference for the first time. It's actually not the first time that we are in this situation. We've been finding ourselves more and more at conferences speaking about student housing, whether it's from the education side, whether it's from city development side, or from the investment side. Good morning, everyone. And today we are also looking to build bridges and to see where there are similarities with the hotel industry that most of you are probably very familiar with, but also maybe you're curious about the dynamics of the student housing market. My role will be to moderate the conversation. I will set a little bit the framework in the beginning by sharing some data. I am the co-founder of the class of 2020, which is the European, but possibly also the largest global student housing platform. It's a network-based organization, and a lot of us have become partners of this organization because we needed to work together because a lot of the markets are under-documented and a lot of the innovation is happening so fast that we really need to learn from each other and find ways to exchange and mature in this growing niche. Today we wanted to focus on the sort of what the trends are in this industry. But since we are here at a hotel investment conference, we thought it would be very interesting to continuously go back to the question, to which extent is this similar to the hotel industry and to which extent is this different from the hotel industry? And I really hope that you will participate in this conversation by asking critical questions or just making comments and remarks throughout. We don't have a mic, so I will ask you to say your name and speak a little louder than perhaps you usually do, so everybody can hear. I'm here with four experts from different fields and different places, but all of them are quite all-round, so to say, and we'll be able to address different aspects of student housing. I will engage with them in conversations, but also, since it is such a new category of investment, I also asked everybody to bring some slides and show, what is student housing looking these days? What is the product? What are sort of the numbers that are interesting to compare to other investment categories? So it's Alex, Charlie, Maureen, and Tim, and we'll hear more from them as we go along. So as I said, I have actually two jobs. I'm also a colleague of Charlie. But this is my favorite hobby, the class of 2020. And we started like 3 years ago with a very small group in Amsterdam. And today it's actually, as I mentioned, like a truly European platform. But more and more groups from even outside of Europe are connecting to it. And I can really recommend you to check out the website also for the annual trend report if you're interested in more information. The website is www.classof2020.nl. Why are you here, or why is this market actually becoming more important? There are many, many factors, but I thought I would highlight a few of them. The first one is, and I think that really allows us to make a comparison with the hotel industry, is this millennial market. It's this growing market of young people, increasingly mobile, global community, seeking a different type of education than their parents, and often connecting it also to international experience and travel. And what you see here, and unfortunately it's very blurry, but I think the symbols can explain a little bit the impact. These are the sizes of the international student population in those cities that are highlighted. And as you can clearly see, in the European market, it's London that is the largest market. And some surprising other cities, perhaps, like Vienna, but also Madrid. So those circles give an indication of a market for people that do need accommodation when they move to these cities. What you also see is that the growth rates in these cities are, for the next couple of years, are quite significantly, but a lot of them are double digits, and most of them are between 15 and 30%. So they're growing markets, and all of those students need homes or rooms, if you like. What enables this global student mobility, as many of you perhaps know or are aware of, since 2002, the Bologna agreement in Europe enabled a European market in terms of higher education degrees. So it made the market transparent, and it allowed universities within the European market to compete with each other, also for students. So you have the introduction of the bachelor programs and the master programs, which allows any student within the European market to basically obtain them with similar accreditation. And that's a major step forward. It also makes it, for universities, obviously very interesting to compete for that talent. And as you can see here, based on the Times Education ranking, a lot of the best universities, or according to this ranking, universities are located within some of the major cities like London, Paris. The Netherlands is doing very well, Zurich, or Switzerland in general, and some of the other cities to the east, including Berlin. So it's those cities that you see growing very rapidly, and student accommodation is following. If I would have stood here a couple of years ago, I would probably be able to show you a few local players that were investing in maybe as non-profits or as university-driven developers in the cities where they belong or where they started. Today, it's a very different market. Last year, all of a sudden, we saw a surge in Europe of announcements of cross-national investments, and this map just shows like where those investments are going and where they started. And this overview just has a summary of some of the big names that are currently investing. And what you see here is like companies like Bouwfonds, Investment Management, but also Greystar and Roundhill. Maybe some names that you know from other investments. They are starting to invest in the student housing market. They usually start in a home market, traditionally the UK, but some of them are also, for example, started in Spain or Australia, like campus living villages. And now they're expanding beyond their boundaries. They do it usually with a brand, which is something that I think is also very similar to the hotel industry, like Mellon District, Nido, the student hotel, Unique, but also with a investor behind them. So we have pension funds, we have Goldman Sachs, Azora Capital, Roundhill, PGGM, pension funds. So it's a very wide range of investors stepping into this market. And Starwood Capital just announced last week that, or 2 weeks ago, that they're also for the first time moving into the student housing sector. Why are they doing this? Well, because it's an alternative asset and it helps the investor either diversify, but also to seek a higher yield than in some of the markets, than in some of the segments that they have been able to invest in before. Most of them compare it to the resi market, the residential market. That's where most of them are coming from, and then they see that there is a premium yield in the student housing sector. But interestingly, and there's an example here with the student hotel today, there are also people that are building student accommodation that is more similar to a hospitality product, like a hotel product. So the comparison with the hotel industry then becomes relevant as well. There's not that much documentation on the market, so it's one of the things that we are trying to do with the class of 2020. But last year we reported over 120,000 beds in planning or in development, or at least projects that were announced in the European market. 60,000 beds were currently actually being built, and the total investment of all those deals and transactions was more than 3 billion last year. It just shows that it is still a niche market, but it's very interesting how fast it's growing. And this shows also the performance of student housing compared to residential in some of the markets. It says here based on 4 years in the UK, based on 15 years in Sweden, and based on 3 years in France. So it's that premium that makes it, for some investors, very interesting. As I mentioned, the higher education market is definitely the driver for the student mobility. You see that the number of people participating or engaging in studies at higher education institutions throughout the world is growing very rapidly. And a growing number of them, obviously, in the upcoming markets where the middle class is growing very rapidly, and where also sending your kids to higher education institutions has become the norm. A lot of them have universities that are not as well developed as the academic tradition in the US and the UK and the European market. So it's very attractive for people to send their kids to those markets and to obtain education there. It's a prestige product, so to say. You could compare it to a luxury product in that sense. It's very expensive, and when they go, everything needs to be arranged, and that's where student housing accommodators come in. Some of the numbers, I think, are maybe interesting also later on to look up at the class website. But this one, I think, is also quite telling. Over the last 10 years, the number of students worldwide in higher education grew 78% to almost 175 million. And the next 10 years, we'll see an additional growth, which will bring the number of students to 263. At the OECD reports, it says that the international student numbers are going up to 8 million very quickly as well. So that's students that go out of their local market and travel abroad. How do you, why is student housing interesting? I think we just saw, but what do you do then? Like, how do you start? Which markets are interesting? And some of those, some of the cities are quite obvious, so to say, and others are maybe a little bit more surprising. This is a ranking that's based on the presence of universities, population, student mix, quality of living, and the affordability. It says 2012 there, but it should say 2013. But clearly, cities like Paris and London, which have more than 300,000 students each, are top destinations, great universities, also interesting because of the job opportunities afterwards. But also cities like Boston, for example, are really, really strong student markets because they have such a prestigious cluster of universities, and they have a very strong student life tradition. In Europe, Zurich and Berlin can be pointed out, with Vienna, I mentioned already before. Smaller cities like Amsterdam are growing very rapidly as well. Maybe, and then I actually really want to go on. Just for you to maybe to get an idea of what this product was, I wanted to ask Maureen if you could explain, what you've seen as sort of the development of the product and some of the things that maybe make them similar and different from hotel.
Sure. I think what we're seeing here is this is an idea of what the stock used to look like. What we found, and I'm talking from particularly a UK perspective because that's where I've been working for the last 12 years, is that the stock was rather tired and very much of a cluster model. You found that the UK students often lived in a cluster style environment where you had your various bedrooms, and then you would have a communal kitchen. And it was a rather modest living environment. As time went on, and again, this is another older vision, the next, your studio apartment layout, again, where a rather modest living environment, your kitchenette, place to sleep, you know, kind of grungy carpet, but, you know, sufficient. You weren't looking at the student accommodation market as a potential lucrative option. But we've seen quite a few changes over the last 10 years, I would say, some trends. And I think one of the biggest trends is that we actually, I'm not sure if you're able to stop those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try.
Sorry. I think one of the biggest trends is the recognition of the market that students are customers. They're not just simply consumers. They don't necessarily want to live in a grungy environment. Students are very aspirational. They want to live in an environment that they feel suits them a bit more. They look at university as though it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they no longer want to just suffice living off of pot noodles with, you know, 4 other students who might not be as serious as they are living in the same environment as them. So what you find is that the structures themselves have taken a much smarter approach. They're architecturally interesting, and they're also built for economies of scale. The student hotel on the left-hand side, 700 beds in Amsterdam, is actually the largest hotel in the whole Benelux region, and it just so happens to be a student hotel. On the right-hand side, you have Nido Student Living in Spitalfields area. That's 1,200 beds in the center of London. Bottom left is Melon District in Barcelona with more than 700 beds, pool on site. Yeah, 4 pools. Well, you know, why be greedy? And then Urban Nest in Sydney on the top. And so, I mean, the designs are just much smarter. We're coming out with a much more interesting product than previously. Again, kind of similar to hotels, and I'm using these as examples of how they're similar. Communal spaces, very open plan, very unique. They reflect the students' needs. They're funky. You have sky lounges, you have intimate spaces, you have lobby areas, just much more unique treatments of spaces. So room layouts and designs, unlike what we saw previously, much smarter room designs. You have a lot more wood flooring. The spaces are flexible and zoned, so you have a sleeping space, a dining space, a study space. A lot more storage spaces. Students have storage, underbed storage with beds that are on hydraulics, floor-to-ceiling windows for better lighting, good ventilation, just really smart interiors, much more in tune for what students are looking for. And a lot of the product that had been developed recently was primarily a single studio product. Again, when you found international students coming from, say, I'm using England as an example, from Asia or from India or wherever, they're spending a lot of money on student fees, more than the local lot is actually paying. And they're much more serious, I would say, about getting their education done in a certain amount of time. So they want to be serious about controlling that space and in living in a nice, quiet environment if that's what they want. If they want a more communal living space, then we're also still doing cluster flats. We're doing 2-bedroom apartments. You'll find your 2-bedroom apartment is very good for the American study abroad market because they're very used to living together. And also, it's a less expensive option. Cluster flats will still be attractive to the UK student who likes to live in that very communal environment. But it's also good for your language students who need an opportunity to listen to English coming from a bunch of different students. So it's quite multi-purpose this way. Communal spaces, again, students really aren't wanting for anything. It's still about food, fun, and fitness. Pools, movie screening rooms. There's usually food and beverage options. We now have karaoke rooms. We have music rooms, teaching spaces where academics can come from abroad, bring their students, rent out the academic room, and house their students in the same building. Courtyards for outside entertainment and things like that. And then service. Service has improved quite dramatically. It's very customer focused now, where you have lots of IT. Students can connect up to 5, pieces of kit at one time. Also, knowing that students aren't going to be bringing their linens, their kitchen packs, their towels with them. So there's the offer for students to buy those. They arrive in their room, their bed is made, everything is there waiting for them. If you'd like to use a bike, Student Hotel has branded bikes for the students to use. There's 24-hour security and concierge-style services. If students don't want to do their laundry, they can call the maid. If they want their room cleaned, they can call the maid. Just much more customer service focused. So I would say that's really how the transition has been over the last 10 years, of just improving the stock and the quality and the service that are provided to students, because they are genuinely customers.
Yep. And the projects that you pointed out, they all are fully furnished rooms.
Yes.
Is that always the case, or are there also operators that provide housing that is more a traditional residential product with no furniture?
Definitely. There is still a very traditional product out there where I would say it's probably more targeted toward the local market, who is truthfully bringing their sheets, their towels, their bed stuff, kitchen stuff, everything. They're given the room, the bathroom, and maybe a sparse, a kitchenette without all the kit, and they're expected to bring their own.
Yeah.
So there is still, what we discovered is that there was a real lack of, I would say, a more niche, higher quality product, like there is in the hotel. You have, from your real modest style hotels to your very high-end hotels. And it was just kind of out of a normal evolution that we discovered that there was a market out there that was willing to pay more for a better quality product, but also along with that, we needed to provide service. It wasn't just about lip service.
Right.
So,
and how much do people pay in Europe for student housing?
Well, in Europe, I would say, for example, on a project that I'm working on right now in Dublin, we would be looking at anywhere between 200 and 240 euros a week. Mm-hmm. And in London, we would be looking at 300 to 450 pounds per week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is the top end, though, I would say, the top end. So sort of a standard ensuite cluster room, so a 12.5, 13 square metre room with an integral shower. In Zone 1, that might be at 240 to 275 a week. But that's Zone 1 London, central London, all the way out to Zone 2, Zone 3, where you can still find a modern new building at 150, 160.
Yeah.
And so there is quite a range in the market. I think operators, all operators have tried to pioneer new product lines, new types of formats. And so, for example, one of the schemes we've been involved in is a scheme by Westminster Bridge. And for example, we're putting some twin rooms in there, so two students staying, but a purpose-built twin room, purpose-designed. And you can live in central London overlooking the Thames for 150, 160, 170 a week, which is great value, great value. So,
Tim, before we learn more about what you do, Marina, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned study abroad. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, the student housing accommodation has been focused on long-term leases. Mm-hmm. What do you see in the market of like short-term education programs? Study abroad is one, but also edu travel. That's a market that traditionally has been also serviced by the hostel industry and some of the smaller hotel chains.
I think what you're finding, and this is particularly from the American perspective, is that students rarely spend an entire year abroad. They just don't have time within their curriculum. You'll find lots of students spending a semester, but even more so spend 8 weeks or less. And that, I would say that was the first challenge, because when I first moved to London, I was working for a U.S. study abroad organization who was developing a student dorm. And so they were the owner as well as the customer. But they only needed semester beds. So I had a building with 300 beds, and I only needed 80 for them in the fall, but I needed 120 for them in the spring. Mm-hmm. And then during the summer, they had 15 different customized programs with different start dates and end dates and different numbers. And so my building was an entire game of Tetris. And what we discovered very quickly—
An actual hotel, actually.
It was. I mean, it was very much, and we could only rely on other programs that had those types of programs. I think I had, in a building of 300 beds, 20 students that were full year. I couldn't afford any more of that because I couldn't juggle around the beds enough to fit the client owner.
Yeah.
So we had to open our doors to language school students, which was actually fantastic because they were never serviced before.
Yeah.
They were primarily a homestay market,
Yeah.
but also the language school students, because they're on a package deal, don't necessarily know what they're paying for rent. They get their instruction and their accommodation all as one big package. And so they'll stay for 2 weeks, or they might stay for 1 month or 2 months or whatever, but they filled the gaps perfectly. But there is a massive study abroad market that is still not being tapped into because, you know, operators want to fill it up for 50 weeks of the year, which is all fine and dandy, but you're missing a massive market. You're missing a massive market that
Great.
otherwise would, and they know they have to pay more because they are a short-term stay.
Yeah, so they pay more per night. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for that bridge. Because, Charlie, the student hotel has identified that market as an opportunity?
Yeah, and just a bit of history. I come from the UK, where the traditional student housing has been done. Started off on the back of 25-year leases from universities. So you were much more of a developer, building a building that complied with the requests of the universities. There was a lease in place. You had no contact with the students, and you sold the investment. As the timeline went on, the universities reduced the length of leases, and as a consequence, and operators like Tim and ourselves and previous companies had to work directly with the customers. When I moved to Holland 11 years ago, I really wanted to take all the good working practices that the UK does so well, but I wanted to bring a brand into it. I wanted to bring the design and the elements and actually care about the experience of our customer. And in the UK, 11 years ago, we didn't care about the experience of the customer because it was all about filling making our spreadsheets with no vacancy and everything like that. Luckily, the Holland is a complete nightmare to do student accommodation. Under the residential permits, they've got very strict regulations about the minimum size of room, the length of stay. They have a cap on the rent, etc. So to do our student accommodation model that we've done so well in the UK was impossible under the residential permits. Luckily, I'd bought a couple of buildings, or stupidly, I'd bought a couple of buildings, so I was kind of committed to making it work. And when we opened our first project in Belgium, we discovered that, with our check-in process and the services that we were delivering and the facilities that we've seen we were delivering, we actually looked like a hotel. So we said, well, why don't we become a hotel? What's the restrictions in the hotel sector? And then we realized, of course, we can build small rooms, and we've got no rent restriction, and we've got no real problem with students staying for long or short. So the hybrid model kind of evolved by mistake. I'm now completely convinced with the flexibility that a hotel destination gives us. It means we can really help people like Maureen and help the study groups, and really offer a product that targets our customers' needs much more effectively. Instead of being afraid of vacancy, which we generally are in quite a rigid residential zoning area, we embrace vacancy. And we can see that here, that we break the year into 2 years. 10 months is generally an academic year. Students come in at September. And we dedicate about 80% of our rooms to semester bookings, 5 or 10 months. We have 10% of our rooms which we allocate to hotels, which is mums and dads, certainly in September, coming to drop their kids off. And the rest of the rooms, through the 10 months, we work with Booking.coms and all the other OTAs that you guys work with. And we have, in the summer, we flip that around. So the summer is generally the students want to go home. The parents want that their kids come home. And because we're not afraid of vacancy, we can say, great, well, let's work with the summer market. And that's really why we try to focus on cities like Amsterdam and where they've got a high youth travel, they're the popular destination countries. So the hybrid model is a little bit of a mistake, but it works very, very well, I'm glad to say.
Maybe good also, since not everybody, I'll take your question one second, to show some of the properties you've done.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
or is this a question immediately to this?
It relates to the structure, the way you break it down,
Yeah.
and the models. So if you are doing some of your rooms based on like a hotel stay model, Do you view yourself as a direct competitor to hotels, and how much market share do you take from that pool that would typically go to hotels in the market?
It's a good question, and it's one that's becoming more controversial the quicker we grow. We've got 2,000 beds operational in Holland at the moment. We've got another 25 or 3,000 beds in development. And we come across the hotel operators in cities like Eindhoven, where it's quite constricted hotel market, really worried about us. You know, they're saying these guys are getting a 400-bed hotel, and we're going to eat into their market share. We don't see it like that. We don't experience it like that. The fundamental of our business is servicing students. You know, the strong and stable income that we get from students is very essential to the value of our asset. And we sell the investment at the end. So we get a stronger yield because we've got stable income, because they look at the underlying student population. We do, of course, get some hotel guys. You know, we do have business users coming to stay with us. We have the Japanese guys with the red umbrellas. They come and stay with us as well. But we find generally, you know, we're called the student hotel. So the question is, you know, how many of you guys would come and check into the student hotel? We generally attract the youth traveler. We attract the millennials, the flashbackers. You know, our design is very much engineered towards there, very industrial. These are our open spaces. We really don't try to tick boxes. So we dedicate the space, the best space we can, to give them the best environment. You know, you see organizations like We Work in spaces, and that's kind of what we've got for our students. The gyms that we do are really in good spaces. The receptions are 24 hours. And what's nice about the hybrid model is you really see that traditionally in students, I guess the F&B is always a good example. You know, no student would go down there and have breakfast. They might get a coffee and go out, but your F&B model just falls down in a student residence because they're all upstairs in their flats cooking breakfast themselves, of course. But in a hotel, that's one of our busiest times. That's when everybody goes downstairs. And then you flip it around in the evening, you know, that's when the students are actually more interested to come and spend some money with you and have a beer and maybe a cheap pasta or pizza or something. But the hotel guests are outside. So we see that the mix really ensures that all of our facilities are really well used, and it generates such a, I mean, that's why I get excited about it. It's such an amazing buzz because it's not a student residence. You know, we would all feel comfortable there. We'd all feel comfortable sleeping there. You don't feel you're in a room full of 19-year-old kids. You know, it lowers everybody's pretty relaxed there, so it works pretty well. But to answer your question a bit more directly, the hotel market are worried about us. I personally think that we bring a new, maybe steal more from the youth hostel sector than the hotel sector. You know, we get a lot of our parents, students who come to stay with us, and they go and stay in the intercontinentals because they've got a bit more money and they don't want to stay with us.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
The rest of the panel. So if hoteliers are if they are concerned about you eating away at some of their market share, whether that's accurate or not, you know, the natural outflow would be them looking to see if they can break into that market as well. Do you see any of the major brand companies represented here tiptoeing into this segment, or perhaps offering like a mixed-use type model, where one tower would be for the hotel guest, the other would be for a student, using the efficiencies of back of house?
I think they should be, to be honest. I mean, it's a great potential. I mean, we understand the economics of students. They've done it before. I mean, in Toronto, for example, in Canada, when they had big problems with the SARS, I went to a hotel that they'd converted 6 floors to student residence. So they had a student hotel, but they didn't know it. I mean, they kind of put the students, they had an extra separate entrance and kind of don't interfere with the hotel guests and stuff like that. And but I mean, it'd be interesting to see how you think, Tim, where you're.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, from my business experience in life, we've been much more at the traditional end of student occupancy. So typically, the majority of our residents will stay for a whole year or the whole academic year. So in most cities, that's like a 40 to 42 week let, and then you're looking at maybe a significant percentage of students staying on over the summer. And so you actually do, in say London, for example, majority of lets are say 51 week lets. So it's very different from the student hotel model, which I think is an interesting other part of the market. I mean, certainly my experience with hotels is that you can see where there's quite a lot of crossover, and so we've learned a lot off the hotel industry over the last decade or so. But in terms of the competition, I don't really see a straight competition. Students either live in hotels because they're desperate and can't find student accommodation. So in London, you'll find a lot of students hit town and simply cannot find anywhere to live or anywhere sensible to live, and they'll stay in a budget hotel. But the pricing of that market, your market, is a good step above, a permanent stay pricing. The other time I've used hotels a lot, occasionally you have a late completion, and then you're very keen to engage with the hotel sector and find a few hundred rooms, and that's happened to me a limited number of times. And I don't want to talk about those things.
Tim, you are bringing GSA and the products that GSA does to new markets.
Yes. So, to talk about us, I work for Global Student Accommodation, and Nick Porter, who's my colleague, CEO, set up Unite Group PLC in the UK back in the 1990s, and really was one of the sort of the dawn of time sort of investors in the sector. And we started out developing local buildings for local universities. So we're now basically, so that was the first few years from 1990s onwards. I think what we say, where we position ourselves now is what we try and do as a business is to make a real difference to students' lives. And the reason we say that is if anybody in the room who's been to university, or particularly away to university, if I look back at my own university career, I can't remember my course lecturers, I can't specifically remember what I learned, but I can absolutely remember who I live with and the people in my flat and the experiences I had. So it's a really important part of a student's life is where you live and what you experience. We were able to ride a wave basically from the early 1990s, and in the UK, for example, polytechnics were created into universities, I think in 1992. And in between 1992 and about now, there's been about 600,000 or 700,000 new student places created in the UK market. And luckily, virtually no investment by universities in new accommodation. There's been some, but not a significant amount. And that's created a huge opportunity for our sector to emerge and grow. And I suppose looking at this timeline, just travelling all the way through it, apart from a sort of biblical growth in numbers, we've really still seen the creation of a new asset class. So, and I've consistently compared our asset class to the hotel asset class as we've emerged, because the hotel asset class is well established. It's particularly got some decent lot size sort of appetite in it. But if you go back 15, 20 years, really the student purpose-built, purpose-managed asset class didn't live. And we and a lot of other great operators, many in this room, have created that by reminding everybody that really what underwrites our asset class is this sort of thirst and growth in the knowledge economy globally, really exciting. And it's like almost like human DNA stuff that, you look over anywhere in the world, people will try and get the best possible education for themselves or their children. And that's what really underwrites our asset class, coupled with backing from governments in the knowledge economy of higher education. So it's underwritten by government support in many places. We are consistently, as an industry, full, or very nearly full. We're very counter-cyclical. So in a recession, more people go to university or higher education. In a booming market, more people go to university or higher education. So we're very, very sort of safe, secure, sort of hedged asset class. And the other thing we've been able to demonstrate, we've come from zero in the 1990s to today, that we've seen a real, in that period of time, this timeline, we've seen a growth of really well thought through operating businesses. So people who are very focused on the student experience, who have a research-based approach to how they meet the student demand and requirements and stuff Charlie was talking about and Maureen was talking about, and management operations, which is very specifically focused at the student customer. And that customer is different. That's where another difference. I think that the student customer is often very, very different from a hotel customer and what they're looking for and the experience they're looking for. We also, on this timeline, did this whole growth in accommodation types, which I'm quite passionate about. So if you go back again, when I was a student some time ago, I lived in messy terraced houses, and the anticipation was students would live in rough accommodation and pay low prices. And interestingly enough, in much of Europe at the moment, that's still people's general perception. Students live in Studentenwerke, and in Germany they pay very little. They're actually entitled to poor quality accommodation. But of course, what we all know is that as students have realised they're working more on a global economy scale, the quality of their accommodation and study success is absolutely key. And particularly in some parts of the world, students are paying quite significant amounts of money for their education. There's no longer an option to live in a messy old house, to have things don't work, you have a landlord who keeps the deposit, you haven't got furnishing, you have to arrange your own utilities. And particularly then, as Frank mentioned, the international student, who is, you say 7 or 8 million people in the next few years will leave their country of origin and migrate like birds around the world. And just imagine yourself, you're getting off a flight, you may have flown through 24 hours, you've got 2 big suitcases, you're leaving home for the first time, you're arriving in a strange city. So what experience are you going to get in that city, and where are you going to live? And really meeting that demand and that appetite for quality. And also, and again, the difference between the hotels really and us is that, I've seen the go from the terrace house to the standard cluster flat. In London, we established a business called Urban Nest in London, Australia, back in 2009. And what we're absolutely focused on is pioneering new room types and products, which you guys know inside out. Every hotel you go to, you've got different nuances, But we've gone from everything from a standard cluster flat room to a studio room. We've pioneered triples, so 3 students sharing a big studio together, through to now twin rooms, as I mentioned, in central London, doing those in Australia. We're also on site in Dubai doing twins. So you're providing very affordable, purpose-built accommodation in the centre of major cities. And so, yeah, it's exciting. I think from my point of view, apart from the specialist branded operators and this sort of platform for knowledge economy, I think looking into the future, I think it's going to be very interesting. If you say, look, broadly, there'll be another 100 million students by 2025, roughly. And all of us in this room and our industries together will benefit from that, driven by appetite for learning, study success, knowledge economy around the world. Cheap air travel. I bet you guys are talking about cheap air travel, massive planes full of cheap seats. And so the cost of studying and the cost of travelling is going to reduce. And the other thing, I think, when we look at student numbers, if I look at London as an example, there's about 375,000 students in London. That's full-time higher education students. But if you add in all the other emerging types of learning, you've got the growth in the feeder colleges, so people who want to travel and learn to get up to university standards, go to America study. You've got branched campuses, satellite campuses, go back 15, 20 years, university like LSE would have students just based in London, or Heriot Watt in Edinburgh would have students just based in Edinburgh. And now you go to Dubai, there's 34 branch campuses. Canadian University in Dubai, Heriot Watt, American University in Dubai, BITS Pilani, list goes on. And that's creating a much more dynamic travelling customer group. And the study course of the future will be, rather than spending 3 years in Munich and grinding through your business degree, you might do a semester in Munich, you might do a year with MIT in Boston, you might go and do another year in China. And so it's a very, very exciting, this whole feeder college, international student numbers, actually the real number of young people who are travelling to study is far greater than the number of people going to third-tier universities. And we're looking to play in that space. I think it's Kaplan have got 400 locations in 30 countries.
Yep.
Laureate, another private, so growth in private providers. Laureate, a private, privately funded university operator, and I think they educate about 800,000 students around the world. So these are big spaces which are emerging. Yeah, big, absolutely. So but hopefully it's a very, very quick canter through that timeline, and where we're focused.
And it would be a very different timeline for a market like Germany, Spain. Could you say anything about that? Especially the US is considered a more mature market, similar to the UK. What is the position of other markets on this timeline?
It is. It's interesting. I mean, I would say that I would say if you look at you go back to the university city slides, you'd obviously spot a natural Western bias. And so people who operate in the West believe they've cracked it. I suppose the best way of describing it. It starts with Americans. So America, no doubt, has got a very well-established higher education system. It's the #1 international destination for international students, and very big established operators there. Having said that, and the UK is probably the next in line, it's #2 destination or #3 destination. What you're though seeing now is that there's some really big movers out there. And I can't remember off the top of my head, I'll just flick through my notes, but there's some really big changes in that complacent Western world sort of picture. Singapore, I think on that list, jumped from 12th to 3rd over a year.
Yeah.
Hong Kong jumped from 20th to 7th as the major student destination. And it's just my complacency. I've learned long ago to drop it, because you've said we know a lot about London. 375,000 full-time students, plus all the feeder colleges and the language schools and all that sort of stuff. Tokyo, where we're now based as well, is 1.3 million students. And London sort of plays Mumbai. Mumbai's 550,000 students.
It's interesting.
China, there's 32 million students in China.
Universities are really recognizing this, and they want to attract international students, so that not only is the education so important, but they're then realizing that the room and the experience, what you said that you remember, ties in with the brand image of that university. So the whole experience is becoming much closer. Traditionally, the universities used to actually say, yeah, whatever, we don't really care where the students sleep, great, you go and sort it out. And now these organizations are realizing to compete, to jump up the list, they need to compete in.
So I think back to your question, well, what we see, I mean, what we see for the future, and again, you guys and your industry is right on top of this, is what you're seeing is emergence of these massive global knowledge, tech, business hubs.
Yeah.
London's absolutely one of those places, but look around the world and see the other cities which our industries are operating in, where that's happening. That's why I think Germany, back to your question, where Germany is absolutely, obviously, the big higher education market. Having said that, it's got a very different mix of students compared to, say, the UK or America. It's got sort of international students from Eastern Europe, more so than, say, UK, which might have more of an Asian bias to international students.
So you expect investors to continue to go to the UK first, or do you?
Well, no. I would say we're absolutely on the sort of, if you say compare mainland Europe to UK, you could say it's probably not, behind is the wrong word, but it's somewhere sort of in the emergent state in terms of an asset class.
Well, it's physically detached, so
yeah,
I guess you can say.
If you jump in, say, comparing Germany to, and what's happening in Germany, I see Germany as an interesting country. It's suffering demographic decline to a certain extent, which gives you question marks over how many German students will there be in 2, 3, 5 years' time, offset by growth in international students coming in. But what you've got in Germany, you've got a number of very key hub cities, like Berlin, for example. We all know Berlin is emitter, it's exciting tech, young people, knowledge. That's going to be a very different city compared to maybe some other smaller university cities going forward. I think the complacency for me is just saying, look, if we sat here 10 years ago and said, what if there'll be 34 branch campuses in Dubai, everybody would laugh at me and say that's ridiculous.
Right.
But I think what if is what will cities look like in 10 years' time?
Yeah.
I think the one point that you were making was very key, though, with the Bologna Declaration.
Yeah.
And one other thing with that is that the Bologna Declaration set out that all of these programs would be taught in English.
Yeah.
So whereas previously, 15 years ago, if I was interested in studying in Germany, I needed to speak German. Or in Italian, I would need to speak Italian. That's not the case anymore. So now students just look at it like, where do I want to go in the world? Because I can get my education in a bachelor's, master's, whatnot, in English, and it's going to be recognized worldwide. And now it's more like, okay, where are those hubs?
Yeah.
Which is why Asia's popping up.
Right. Any questions from the room or things that you want to comment on? It's going to bring in another element that I think is interesting to the industry comparison. Sir,
If you combine,
do you mind saying your name and?
Ernesto Marino from Brazil. If you combine the student demand with typical hotel demand, wouldn't you cut the consistency of the product?
What do you mean, sorry, cut the consistency of the...
It means, for example, as a parent, my kid is going to Yale this summer. Okay? I wouldn't like to have my kid in a student place with other demand, even young people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I started, I had a lot of resistance from banks, from funders, from everybody saying, yeah, how are you going to do it? The reception, you need a separate entrance for your students and for your hotels, and you can't mix the facilities up. I was like, man, what are you talking about? I walked into Starbucks and I didn't see a separate entrance for a kid under 20 years old and somebody over 40 years old. We all get on together, we all share the space, and actually I see it as an advantage that, coming back to the F&B, I can offer a much stronger F&B concept because the hotel revenue that I get in the morning means that it's open all day, which has benefits for the students, it has benefits for the atmosphere. The activity that I bring in the evening to the F&B means that the hotel guests benefit because it's not an empty bar. So in my view, it adds. It's not for everybody, of course, but in my view, it works very well. But I think technology is very, very important that we talk about that, because that plays really an important role.
Right,
an
enabler
as well.
I mean, I think it's good. that the student hotel is an example of also of differentiation in the market. Like as Tim was pointing out, like GSA has defined a product that is targeting a specific audience, and there are many different players in the market that are looking to position themselves and creating a product that they feel is what students are looking for. Some of the hybrids that we're seeing here on the page are still, say, like the exception. Question here in the front.
No, the thing is, the experience for the student, maybe it's nice. The experience of myself paying the tuitions of my child, I want him to be the best student ever in Oxford University, and I know they have. He needs to have a lot of maybe fun too. Okay, but the first objective of he going from South America to Oxford is to be the number one.
Yeah.
Okay? So and I understand what you say that hey, you cannot differentiate, but if you put me the chocolate in front of me, it's much easier that I eat the chocolate than if not. If you tell me that every day you have a very nice atmosphere down in the reception, hey, for me it's very difficult to control not going down. You know, I'm 6,000 kilometers from my town, don't know anyone.
But I think that's the key. That it's great.
We're going to be running the bar.
Yeah.
For the investment side, it's pretty well, but
Yeah.
I'm talking, I mean,
Yeah.
It's one
it
of the
would be
reasons.
a problem.
It's not necessarily one of the reasons. You know, I mean, if you look out there into the higher education landscape, you know, people might say, for example, growth in technology means that in the world of the future, you will have a holographic lecture from a top professor at Yale, and you'll be in Brazil, or you can be in Sao Paulo, or you could be in China. The reality is that if most recent research absolutely demonstrates that whilst you can do distance learning, for example, and you can get stuff off the internet and read it at home in your bedroom, the vast majority of your learning experience comes from doing what we're doing now, having a chat. You know, meeting young people your same age, doing the same course or different course, sitting down and chewing the fat on it. That is why you look at some of our buildings in our industry, that you see a real growth in study areas, collaborative learning areas, place for people to meet, because that supports their learning experience.
They
Yeah.
look
That's why
somehow like a fraternity residence, really.
Well, but then with daily cleaning. Alex, yeah.
That he raised with the temptation. At the end of the day, it's living learning communities, which is where your academics are not exactly going to give you the full picture. And there's been a lot of studies which prove that people living in purpose-built student accommodation actually perform better academically and stay throughout their whole academic term and have a higher graduating retention rate. So I think it adds more value than it actually takes it away.
Yeah. Alex, the reason why you're on this panel is because you are also looking into how technology can support the student housing accommodation. And I thought it was interesting when we chatted before, the similarity between technology that has been developed for the hotel industry. And I wanted to ask you particularly maybe to draw that comparison for the property management systems and the IBE, the booking engines.
Well, I mean, at the end of what we're doing is we're a startup that just having recently realized that the student accommodation industry is starting to grow. And with some of these similarities which you're seeing a lot of processes and operations. So you have your check-ins, your check-outs. You've also got distribution, so how are you booking, how you're selling the rooms. And then you've got controlling and reporting, which is standard, which we see in the hospitality all the time. And now as our products are becoming more mature and developing more, we realize that there's a real need for technology to help facilitate this. And whilst you have your PMS systems in the hospitality industry, they focus only on the property. But as we're dealing with students, the technology can also be used to really facilitate that experience for them and give them that experience side of things. And so, yeah, with some of these similarities that we see, we've decided to try and integrate technology with student accommodation, and it's looking to be a good start.
But is a hotel PMS the same as a student accommodation PMS?
No, it can't be, because you've got so many different stakeholders, and the students actually are are booking with just that one particular property, so to speak, not necessarily a broad global distribution system. So the system has to be adapted to the operations for student accommodation, dealing with, I think Tim had some interesting stories earlier on about behavior of students and how that conflicts with the neighbors. And the local community. So the property management systems which you're going to have to put in place have to be able to address these issues as well.
Okay. So the hotel PMS system, the companies that do hotel PMS, are they active in the student market as far as you know? Or?
No, not at all. There's not that many providers currently who are providing this software, this solution, and the ones that are, they're now starting to learn from the student accommodation sector, from the hotel sector, sorry, and then it's starting to integrate it with the current existing booking platforms that you have.
Yeah. You mentioned, what I was curious also about the booking system. Tim, you mentioned, for example, someone from, say, Vietnam booking a room at your facility somewhere in the UK. That's an online process, or does it require a Tetris dashboard marine use?
The evolution of our sector as a whole, and so in my experience, you know, if you go back to 1990s, everything was Excel spreadsheet based. You know, you'd answer the phone on the 56 ring and, you know, put an A4 print off the photocopier on the window to attract customers. Obviously now, what it's all about is actually best-in-class acquisition of customers and the customer journey. So that's, you know, expression you guys use a lot. So from when people first find about us, website optimization, looking online, being able to book online and pay online in local currency. Because again, think about students, if they're moving countries, they often arrive in a country without a bank account in that country. So having payment methods which actually respect that and work alongside the customer in terms of their payments, all the way through to systems now which enable the student customer to, most students want to be left alone. So this is again a big differentiator with hotels. When I go to a hotel, I want to be pampered and assailed by quality of service. But I think most people living at home, you just want to be left at home and left alone. But so being able to access your account online, report a defect online, get it fixed without too much sort of fuss and bother is where we're at now. And those systems are very much, you say, you know, very much systems-based, PECs, booking systems, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And one of the things that obviously the hotel industry has been challenged is the way people find a hotel, especially the role of the OTAs. And the way the internet actually supports like kind of a pyramid very quickly. Alex, do you see that also happening in the way students find their student accommodation? I mean, is there a booking.com for student accommodation?
They've recently seen a lot of investment. You have Housing Anywhere and Uni Places, which are existing platforms that kind of facilitate the accommodation search, but they're not working with operators specifically. They're more working with private landlords who have a room extra in their house, so it's more in line with an Airbnb concept. And we're seeing a lot more of those now starting to come out, especially as the supply is so low.
Any questions in the room at this moment? We have, I think, a few more minutes here in the front.
So back to your hybrid model, would you say, because the first thing when you said that popped in mind, actually Airbnb, would you think you have found a way to like actually be a hotel, but still be able to compete with Airbnb, having this mid-term to long-term stays and having these studios kind of type housing?
Yeah, I mean, Airbnb are not too big a problem for us. We use Airbnb sometimes to rent some of our rooms, not particularly. We sometimes get students trying to sub-rent their rooms through Airbnb, which we find quite funny. We have, I mean, Airbnb is a little bit different. I think more Nespik and Unilodge are more trying to get into our market, but we don't really work with them. I mean, the student generally finds accommodation in a different way. They pick a university, or in a case like London or New York, they say, I want to go to London. I want to find a course there I can stay in London. Then when they go and they spend time looking for accommodation, so, you know, and the journey is slightly different as well. And to come back to your question, you know, what I think number one priority is not the successfulness of the child in their degree, it's the safetiness. And are they going to be safe? Are they going to be happy when they move across the world? Are they going to meet friends? Are they going to be integrated into that local community? That's parents' number one's concern. And And what Alex was saying, if that is done properly, if a student is successfully integrated into their micro community, into their bigger community, then they will succeed. If they're not, then they're going to go home. So it's, what we're doing is putting a platform there. There's lots of these technology guys who are coming along, but ultimately the student will generally find us. They'll go to mum and dad and say, hey, I want to stay here. And mum and dad will spend hours on that computer checking who the hell we are, making sure we're going to provide services, making sure it's going to be safe, making sure there's other nice people in that community as well. And the advantage that the hotels have got, you know who's going to be in an Intercontinental. You know that there's certain brands. You know if you want to go and have fun, you're going to stay in a certain brand as opposed to another brand. And the student market is slowly getting there. The emergence of brands, the emergence of what you're doing, what we're doing, it means that people will know where they are. So when parents can decide, hey, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to go to a university campus, and it's going to be on campus, and there's going to be no drinking after 10 o'clock, that also exists. So Airbnb is not too big a problem.
I would say, people always need to live somewhere. If you say Dublin, so we're more in Dublin as well. Dublin's in sort of crisis, really, because students simply, a lot of students cannot find anywhere to live. But in our industry, it's even in the UK, it's only housing 15% of students or something like that, I don't know, 15, 20% of students. So everybody else is living out, renting flats, sharing flats, finding a house to share. But in most capital cities particularly, we all know there's a housing crisis. And the other thing I would say about students is they're quite polarised in where they want to live. And safety is not just about physical safety of building, i.e. you've got security, you've got key systems, all the usual stuff. It's also students, when you ask them the question, a big part of their security is, they'll say, I feel safe in a studenty area. So there's other students moving around, I feel safe. I can live in a very smart neighbourhood, but there's no other students, I feel a bit unsafe. And so, really in terms of students accessing different types of accommodation, students, of course, will carry on. They do everything from Airbnb to flat shares to house shares. If they can't find accommodation in the centre of town, they can move miles out and travel for half an hour. Or in Dubai, they travel for 2.5 hours to get to their course. Has a huge impact on their study success, obviously, and it costs a lot of money.
So like saying Dublin is actually a prime example because there's only about 7,000 beds in a student market of about 100,000. So there's quite a bit of opportunity.
Yeah. So
And
demand is
they're asking
exceeding
the Irish
supply.
to open up
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
bedrooms for
Yeah.
students because it's they're losing students because they can't find
Yeah.
a place to live.
Okay, great comment to end this panel conversation. I started the session by claiming that there are often more similarities between the hotel industry and the student accommodation industry than people expect. I would like to take a vote, and from whatever professional perspective you've listened to this conversation, if you feel that there are more similarities than less, could you raise your hand? Okay, good. Thank you very much. And if you want to hear more or just come and get my card. And as I said, the class of 2020 is a really good resource for data, trends, etc. So hope to see you soon again.